So that brings us to today, and you touched on this. The church needs to recognize that so much of their messaging is a byproduct of a hyper-materialistic, secular worldview. We are the first people, and really that species in the West, to not believe in the spiritual dimension. Even the Aztecs believed in a spiritual dimension. The Incans, the Mayans, the Egyptians, the Indus River Valley. We are the first generation of secular atheists. Kind of post-1900s, this idea really started to grow. And so much of the church, without they realizing it or not, has embraced this secularism within their messaging because they're afraid to talk about the spiritual aspect of it. They actually have a hyper-technical, materialistic gospel when you bring it down to it. It's very technical. If you do this, you will get that. If you take this, you will get that. Very cause and effect. When in reality, the spiritual world is very humbling because there are forces around us that we don't quite always understand. There's an invisible dimension that can be very confusing to us. So how do we best understand this spiritual dimension, and why is it the modern church is so afraid to talk about it?
Well, I've spent my life in the church. I love the church, so I have some opinions. I think the church has moved so far away from the authority of Scripture. My lifetime coincides with perhaps the most precipitous decline of Christian influence in the history of the church. That's unsettling to me. What we've watched in modern education amongst our elementary and high school children started in theological education. Critical theory dominates most of the elite theological schools today. And it takes all the authority out of Scripture. We sit in judgment of Scripture. It doesn't sit in judgment of us. Our most influential and celebrated leaders have been trained that there is no authority in the Scripture. So we become systems for social causes. We become civic clubs that have a little ecclesiastical language. And that's not the church. The church is an expression of the power of God. Now, what gives me great hope is since 2020, God has begun a sifting and a shaking and a realigning, and there's new voices coming forward. There's so much truth being spoken in our culture right now, but predominantly it's not coming from pulpits. And it's coming from a younger generation of people with the courage to say there is good and evil, right and wrong. They're giving an expression to a biblical worldview. It very much looks like an awakening, or at least the embers of an awakening. And I have grieved a bit that it didn't come from the places I would have preferred, but that's not mine to call. I just see it happening, and I'm going to go get in line and help. A building in religious language does not make us the church. Honoring Jesus of Nazareth as Christ, Lord, and King does. And that's what you're watching for. That's where you want to engage. That's where you want to give your time and your money and your attention and your efforts. That's where you want your children to be. Because that's where there is life and power. That's what will bring another generation liberty and freedom for all. To the degree that our founding documents and founders had ideas that extended liberty for a few generations, it's only a reflection of the degree to which they cooperated with principles that are embedded in Scripture.